Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This presentation is about intercultural communication with focus on the Arab Islamic culture and more specifically the Gulf area and more specifically in a school setting. I have been giving this presentation for the past few years to international schools as orientation for international teachers how to deal with people of the Gulf Arabs, and also it helps in general for dealing with students from any other culture. Information in this presentation is actually based on information put forward by sociologists and social anthropologists, mostly Hofstede and Hall, and also based on life experiences. When people come to the Gulf, this is what usually people observe of the culture. They see people are dressed differently, they greet each other differently, they sit differently, and so on. The food is different, of course, as in the case in every other culture, but what we notice is that the art is different. This is called calligraphy, and this is actually the picture on the right is a poem, and it is written in the shape of a horse. This is calligraphy. On the left bottom side is also a flower, but in it we have one of God's attributes written inside the flower. This is also other pictures of calligraphy, also dealing with God's attributes or verses sometimes from the Holy Book. You can see the mosque in the one on the right, and you can see the bird. This is all recent and new type of calligraphy. This is the mosque on the right, and there is no images decorating the mosques. The mosques are decorated by verses from the Quran, from the Holy Book, in the form of calligraphy. And also on the left, this is a greeting card for celebrating Ramadan, or sometimes celebrating the breaking of the fast, the celebration at the end of Ramadan. This is also, you can see the language, the calligraphy, and also the pictures of mosques. So we can see from here, from just these few examples, two things that are prevalent in the Gulf area or in the Arab world, which is the Arabic language, which is very crucial to the Arabs, and also the importance of Islamic practices and Islamic images that we see. This is the Mecca, or the Kaaba. This is where people go to pray and do pilgrimage, and also they do 5 prayers a day also there. This is another thing that people see when they come to this part of the world, is the 5 times call for prayers from the minarets everywhere. And this is people usually are not used to it if they come from Western countries. And the prayer, everybody is supposed to pray 5 times a day, and they're encouraged to do that even at a very young age. And people anywhere they find themselves, when the call to prayer comes, they answer that call, so they take out the mats and they perform the prayers. Now, what you have seen is actually called the observable part of the culture. A culture is like an iceberg. This is what people, sociologists and social anthropologists, when they describe cultures, they describe them like an iceberg. The top part, which is usually observed, is dependent and carried by the lower part, which is the submerged part, which we usually don't see. And this is the same with culture. All the pictures that I have shown you all the pictures that we have seen are all about the observable part of the culture. Now, this presentation can be about the observable part of the culture, but if we restrict it to that, it's going to be do's and don'ts. This is fine, but when you find yourself in a situation that we haven't discussed, then it becomes hard to figure out what to do. And so what I'd rather do is I'd rather give you some information about the submerged part of the culture, the part that is not usually seen, which actually is the cause of the observable part of the culture, which we will allude to at some points in the presentation. So what I want to talk about the context of the Arab Islamic culture. Now, what type of, or what context, what part of the context am I going to talk about? Now, these are the two cultures, like an Arab culture and an expat culture. Now, the observable part of the culture are the words, actions, and dress. Now, the Arab is going to explain your behavior, your words, action, and dress according to his context. That's only normal. And so he's going to fall into misunderstanding. And for you, it's also the same. You're going to explain his words, actions, and dress according to your context, and you will fall into misunderstanding. So what I'm trying to do here is trying to enlighten both of these cultures about each other's context. And by doing that, I'm going to talk about cultural dimensions. These are patterns that have been put forward by Hofstede and Hall, and they describe patterns that exist in all cultures. All cultures value relationship. All cultures have communication style and so on. But I put them in different color. Why? Because the way these cultural patterns manifest themselves in each culture is different, and this is what leads to misunderstandings. We need to understand the dimensions, and then we need to understand how they can be differently manifested in each culture. When we do that, then we minimize misunderstandings between cultures, and we provide ourselves with skills that will help us to interpret any cultural situations that we find ourselves in. I'd like first to discuss the framework for this presentation. The first part of this presentation is going to be discussing these 4 dimensions in general, how they apply to all cultures. So this part of the presentation will be application can be to all kinds of cultures and not just to the Arab culture. Then I will go into the second part of the presentation. I'm going to discuss how these 4 dimensions manifest themselves in the Arab culture. Now, I explained to you before that these 2 parameters, the Arabic language, the Arabic traditions, and the Islamic practices, are very important factors in the Gulf area. So we're going to see how these 4 dimensions manifest themselves through these 2 filters. That is the second part. Now, the third part of the presentation are going to be how these 4 dimensions come out through the Arab Islamic filters, but in the school settings, between interacting the teachers, interacting with the students, and interacting with the parents, and so on. Before I start with the 4 dimensions, I just want to draw your attention to 2 things. When we talk about cultures, we tend to generalize. We tend to say that Arabs communicate this way, Americans communicate this way. We tend to generalize to understand the main idea, to understand the main differences. It is easier to understand the 2 poles than to explain and understand the continuum that lies between them. And so we tend to generalize, but when we tend to deal with an individual, we have to avoid generalization, because if we generalize at the individual level, we're going to go into stereotyping. We're going to put that person we're dealing with in a box and deal with them accordingly, and this will create misunderstandings. So generalization is acceptable when we talk about cultures, but when we go down to the individual level, it is not advisable. All these people can be called Arabs, and all of them can be called Muslims. So what I'm trying to say is that the Arab Muslim world is very diverse, and we need to keep an open mind when we deal with individuals. Now, the other thing I want to draw your attention to is talk a little bit about these 2 important factors that permeate the culture. The first one is Islamic practices. Now, if I say Islam is a religion, I don't really mean the definition of religion that says my spiritual relationship with God. Islam is not like that. It's a way of life. Okay, as you've seen in the pictures, it affects all aspects of life. It affects the arts, it affects the food, it affects how people dress, and so on. But in the Arab Muslim world, you will find people anywhere on this range. This is a range from 0 practicing to most practicing. You will find people anywhere on this range, and where they are on this range actually affects how much these Islamic practices will be seen in the observable part of the culture, how much it will affect the way they dress, the way they speak, what they eat and drink, and so on. Now, the other dimension are the Arab traditions, and I put at the other end modernity, westernization, globalization. This is also a range. You will find people anywhere on this range. So as a result, you will find people anywhere in this field in the Arab world. With more conservative cultures like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, you will find people more of Arab traditionalist and more practicing on the right lower part of the field. And of course, depending on the age affects the age of a person you're dealing with, affects where they are in this range. Also, if they're being Arab expats from another country, from another Arab country, also affects where they are in this field. Now I want to talk about relationships, the first dimension of the cultural dimensions. What do we mean by relation? Now, this has been put forward by Hofstede, and he has more cultures than what I have listed here. You can go back to his book or a blog or a website he has, and it is all in the reference slide at the end. So what do we mean by that? Collectivism, individualism. This is a range also. Some cultures are more collectivist than other cultures. Arabs are more collectivist than Japanese, but Japanese are more collectivist than Americans, and so on. So it's a range. Now, I'm going to talk more about collectivist culture because that's where the Arabs are. And the more you are on the opposite end in this spectrum, the more chance for you to go into misunderstanding with the Arabs. Now, what do we mean by collectivism and individualism? What we mean is the relationship between the individual and the group. How is it in a collectivist society and how is it in an individualistic society? Now, if I want to really simplify the matter, I would say in a collectivist society, imagine a nuclear family. What would be obligations and duties and dependence and interdependence and all of that in a nuclear family? That also exist in individualistic cultures. But there are differences in collectivist culture. You go expand this nuclear family to include everybody in that culture. This is more like a collectivist culture. In individualistic culture, you depend on your mother, you have a specific relationship with her, and so on. But that also exists in collectivist culture with all the culture, everybody in the culture. And so collectivist culture, the person is born already in a group that he belongs to, and the network of interactions and relationship has already been established and put to him before he is born. Okay, and he is continuously for the rest of his life has to deal with these interactions and his obligations and duties and dependence and loyalties and so on. This is not the case in individualistic cultures. You're born into your immediate family, but then you're supposed to grow, and then you make your own relationship, you depend on yourself, and so on. So I'm going to explain this collectivism, individualism. We're talking about four major factors here. There's more if you go back to Hofstede's book. So the identity of a person living in a collectivist culture is a we identity. It's not an I identity as in individualistic cultures. In collectivist culture, it's the group that I belong to. The group gives me the identity. So I am the son of this, the son of this, the son of this, belonging to this tribe. This is my identity. In more individualistic culture, I make my identity as I grow. And this is a big difference. Now, so because of this, because this group forms my identity, relationships are very important. If you just go out from this presentation with the focus on the importance of relationships in a collectivist culture, then that would really help you out in weighing every interaction that you do. Relationships take precedence before work commitments, before achievements. And there's a lot of interdependence. It's like a big family. So I do this for you, you do this for me, and also it affects decision making. Okay, decision making in collectivist cultures is made by consultation. Why? Because the group that I belong to is affected by my decision because it is part of my identity. So if I want to make a major decision, then I consult with them, because whatever I do, the consequences will affect all of them. If it is good consequences, it will lift everybody up with me. If it is bad consequences, dishonors me, then it dishonors the whole group and takes the whole group down with me. But if I consulted with them, then they're there to bear with me the consequences. And this is different than individualistic cultures, where I'm the one who makes the decisions and I'm the one who bears by myself the consequences. So this is just a quick explanation what collectivism and individualism mean. Now let's talk about communication style. Communication style is also different between cultures. This is put forward by Hall. He said that some cultures are high context cultures in comparison with other cultures that are low context. He found, or there's a relationship between collectivist cultures and being high context cultures. And Arabs are high context in comparison with French, and French are high context in comparison with Americans. Now, what do we mean by this? As Lerner had put it, communication is like a dance, okay? And in high context style of communication, what it means is that the dance is more important than the words. So the whole package of communication in high context cultures and in usually collectivist culture, then what I am saying is not as important as the way I am saying it, the use of silence, the tone of the voice, the body language, the relationship between the two. All of this, the situation I am in, all of this affects the actual message. In more low context, individualistic cultures, it's exactly what I say, not the whole package. So you can see from this how much miscommunication can happen and misunderstandings. So I'm also going to explain this now with a few examples. For example, in high context cultures and collectivist cultures, the weight is on the listener. Okay, so if I am from a high context culture, I am going to talk to you, to communicate with you with a dance. And so the weight is on you to analyze and read between the lines and put everything into perspective. What I'm trying to communicate to you might actually be the opposite of my words. That can happen a lot. And in individualistic cultures, which are low context, the weight is on the speaker. You have to say it. If you didn't say it, don't expect me to know it. And so you can see where misunderstandings can happen. If I want to put it in simple words, high context communication is more like family communication, okay? Even in nuclear families, the mother sometimes doesn't have to say a word. She can just have a look at the child in a certain way. The child knows. So that is the style of communication that is called high context. Individualistic cultures, this might be only in the nuclear family, but in collectivist culture, this permeates the whole culture. They all understand the dance, the steps of the dance, and they reciprocate with what should be the complementing steps of the dance. Now, this also affects, because high context cultures are usually collectivist cultures and they value relationship. We go back to the importance of relationships. Then their style of communication has to support that. And so it's usually an indirect style of communication. So if there's any conflict, if I say hi to somebody and he doesn't answer, then I will not tell him what's wrong. I will go to another person who is also valued by the one who didn't answer me and tell him, can you go please check with him why he didn't answer me, or why didn't she answer me? And so there's use of intermediaries in these cultures because they don't want to have a confrontation. They avoid confrontations. Why? Because they can break relationships. We go back now to how important relationships are. And so the style of communication has to support the importance of relationship in collectivist cultures. And so also the fact that saving face. I may not tell you yes or no directly because I want to save your face. If you invite me out for pizza and I don't really want to go for pizza, but you have been kind enough to invite me out for pizza, so I have to save your face. I can't be direct in telling you no, and so I have to dance a dance, being indirect, telling you in a way that I don't really want to go. But if you're not from my culture, you don't know the steps of the dance, you won't get the message and you will misunderstand me and you will end up waiting for me and I don't show up, and then you have all kinds of conclusions based on that for my actions. And so this is briefly about communication style between cultures. What about the use of time and space? Now, the use of time and space, Hall has talked about this, and he divided cultures between two The polychronic cultures are usually collectivist cultures, are usually high context style of communication, and these are the cultures that do more than one thing at the same time. There'll be, you come into the manager, he's entertaining somebody, he's answering the phone, he still has a meeting with you, he's writing something down, all of these at the same time. And this is not the case in monochronic cultures. Okay, monochronic cultures believe in having slots of time, schedules. From this time to this time I'm doing this, from this time to this time I'm doing this. Now where does the problem happen? The problem happens is when, for example, somebody who's monochronic asks somebody who's polychronic, come please, I want to see you at 5. And so he makes a schedule, so he's not doing anything at 5. And then at 5, polychronic gets a message or something from his mother that, or his sister or something, that he has to come and see her. And so he goes, because as I said, relationships takes precedence, and especially with family. And so he goes there and he doesn't show up at 5. And so to you, he has ruined your schedule. But if we flip this, and then we say the polychronic asks the monochronic to come over at 5 because he needs to talk to him, he will be having 2-3 other things doing at the same time. So if the monochronic phones up and says, I'm sorry, I'm not coming at 5, or he has an accident or something and he doesn't show up at 5, the polychronic is fine with him because he has 2-3 other things doing at the same time, so it doesn't really affect him. So he can reschedule any time. So the polychronic are more flexible in their time, use of time, and the monochronic are less flexible because it is based on the schedule. Now, I'm not favoring any style. I'm just saying that there are two different styles, and the clash happens when people from different styles interact and they don't understand the differences between the styles. Now, I put here Arabs, but it's actually collectivist cultures. Now, the use of space, what is that? The space is the personal bubble around us and what we call ours. And if you can go now with the logic, if it's a collectivist culture, you value relationship, then my personal bubble is going to be very small. What I call mine is very small. And so there's a lot of sharing. I'm using this pen, I've been sitting on this chair for a week. It doesn't mean that you have to come and take my permission to take that chair and sit on it. Okay, and so what I call mine, sometimes this is my pen, my ruler, my pen, my eraser or something, but you don't have to take my permission. People will come and take it. This is just a ruler, this is just a pen. This has no value if you compare it to relationships and so on. And this is not the case in more individualistic cultures. Now, the last dimension I want to talk about is high power distance. Now, this is how people relate to power, okay? How the boss looks at the people under the boss and so forth. And so this is also a list. This is put forward by Hofstede, and this is also a list of some of the cultures. Usually, people who are collectivist are usually high context style of communication, are usually polychronic, and are usually high power distance. And you can have problems if you're dealing with people in low power distance. Now, what does this mean? Also, a few things to explain it. It means that the boss has the power. The centralization of power, there's no delegation of power, which means if there's any problem arises because there's no delegation of power, the people under the boss expects the boss to deal with it, so everybody goes back to the boss. He has to deal and solve the problem. There's a lot of dependence on the boss. There's no consultation. The boss does not consult people under him. People under him do not give advice to the boss. They don't feel comfortable giving advice to the boss. He might be a weak boss if he asks for advice. And so this is very quickly about power distance. So these are in general. Now, we've discussed these 4 dimensions in general. Now I'm going to talk about them through the Arab Islamic filter. Now, I have put forward myself 2 models. People can agree or disagree with them, describing the collectivism, the type of relationships from an Arabic model and an Islamic model. Now, this is the Arabic model. The way I see it is that to an Arab, there's the blood relationship. There's a blood relationship that is the strongest kind of relationship. Of course, there's the parents and the siblings, and then there is the blood relatives, the cousins, the uncles, the aunts on both sides, and so on. And then after that, there is the circle of a relationship not by blood, but by tribe, and then the other tribes, and then the country, and then there's the circle of other Arab countries, and then there's a circle of other Muslim and Arab countries, and then there's the rest of the world, and so on. So it is circles. And so what I wanted to say is that in the Arab world, you take the kind of relationships, responsibilities, obligations, duties that exist within a nuclear family, and then you expand that to cover all these circles that I talked about, but in a waning effect, with a waning effect. And so a lot is expected from the circles that are close to one's self, and so more acceptance is expected, more obligations, more protection is given by people who are in these circles, and more duties and loyalties is given to them, and it gets less as people fall in the outside circles. Now, where do you see this playing is that, for example, let's say I want to vote, and if I'm voting for somebody, I don't have anybody running who is from my immediate circles, and so I'm voting at this time of people who are more qualified for this position. But let's assume somebody from my inner circle comes and runs for the position, and then I will shift, my loyalty will shift, and I will vote for that person irrespective of his qualification for the job. Now, people might be shocked, and what happened here? But what happened is that the situation changed, and so I have to give my loyalty now to people in that circle. If I don't, now everybody in my circles will be what shame did you bring? How come you didn't vote for that person? And so it is affecting the group that I belong to, my identity, what I have to live with for the rest of my life. I have to interact with these people, and so if I don't vote for that person, then I have to bear the consequences for the rest of my life. And this is why I changed my vote. Now, some people would matter to them, but I'm just saying this is a general thing. Now, I don't want to talk too much about that, except to say that also a type of collectivism is tribalism. Tribalism is saying that one family is better than another family. And this is, you can find this, and you can find it more with people who are on the range closer to Arab traditions. Now, the Islamic model in general, and there are actually there is another recording about this, specifically about these two models, a shorter one on YouTube. Now, this one is the Islamic model. Islam also values collectivism, certain relationships. For example, in Islam, it is said in the Quran the importance of the relationship with the mother. The mother is very, very important and is highly regarded in Islam, because it's in the Quran that says the mother bore the child upon hardship, and she breastfed him and she took care of him. And so respect and care should be given to the mother, and to both father and mother. It is said, the verses in the Quran, that the children should not be disrespectful to their parents, not even with something like rolling the eyes to their parents. The parents come after God and the Prophet. So it's very important to the relationship. Even one of the companions of the Prophet asked the Prophet once, who should have the best of my companionship? And he said, your mother. And he said, then who? He said, then your mother. He said, then who? He said, your mother. The fourth time he said, who? He said, your father. And so both of them are very, very important to the relationship. And hence the precedence also goes to relationship, especially with the parents, and of course comes after that the siblings. So the blood relationship, you have the circle of blood relationship. There's duties and obligations that goes forth back and forth between these people in these circles. This is proximity by blood. Now then you have proximity by they're relatives and so on, and you have duties and obligations, but you also have proximity, physical proximity, neighbors. There's a lot of obligations and duties actually that should be established with neighbors, especially neighbors that are close by. Even the Prophet's companions thought that the Prophet is going to say that the neighbor inherits you, from how much the Prophet was emphasizing about the relationships, duties and obligations to neighbors. So if you're living close to people who are practicing Muslims, you might have them knocking on your door, how are you, giving you some food, kind of thing. And so because they have to maintain these relationships. Now I want to emphasize that in the Arabic model, their identity, because they belong to this group, these circles establish their identity. But in the Islamic model, the identity is my identity is because I belong to God, not to these groups. So I deal with these groups, with these social circles, according what pleases God. So I am dealing with my relatives, I am dealing with my parents, I am dealing with everybody in these circles with the obligations and duties that were ordained by God. And so this is my neighbors. And then you have proximity by spiritual proximity, those people who share with me the faith, or share other faiths with me, and they believe in God, so there are certain also obligations and duties towards them. Then there is the proximity by humanity, so everybody else who is a human, I have obligations and duties and certain responsibilities towards them. And then of course there is the other, the animals, the planet, the environment. I also have obligations and duties towards that. And then there is something called situational proximity, which is also people that I deal with them in certain situations. If I am working now with somebody, then there are certain etiquettes, mannerism, obligations that I have to interact with that person in a different way. And then if that person is my teacher, there's also a different mannerism and ways of behavior that is expected in that relationship. Doctor, patient, any kind of relationship, situational relationship has its own mannerism in addition to the what I mentioned before. And so Islam values relationships. And also there's a vertical dimension to this, is that the more I want to get closer to God, the more I want to excel in these relationships. And there's more explanation about it in the other recording. And so this is the dimension, the Islamic dimension, the way I see it. And also I wanted to say is that it can support the Arabic model, and it can contradict with the Arabic, or clash with the Arabic model. If you talk about tribalism, Islam does not accept tribalism, that some people are better than others. In the Quran it said, God says that I created you from, people, I created you from man and a female, from a male and a female, so that you become nations and tribes, so that you get to know one another, so that the best of you are the most righteous. So righteousness determines who is better than who, but not race or tribe or anything like that. Now this is what I wanted to say about part, I don't want to talk too much, but this is part of how collectivism can manifest itself, the importance of relationship from an Arabic and from an Islamic perspective. Now what about the style of communication? We said that the Arabs have a high context style of communication that is also supported by the Arabic language. This is calligraphy, as I mentioned, and the Arabic language has been described as being a flowery language. Okay, it has a lot of exaggerations, over assertions, repetitions, storytelling, very flowery language. So it is, the packaging is also supported in this language. Now one thing I wanted to say is, I want to tell you a story first, that this happened, people who were living in Canada. I was visiting my friend, and she had her brother visiting for her for the first time from an Arab country, and we had a Canadian person coming delivering some papers for her husband. And so her brother went to the door. This is the first contact for him with a Canadian. And so he took the papers, and then he said, he translated exactly what he would say in that Arab country. So he said, thank you very much, you really troubled yourself, you shouldn't have done that, we really appreciate what you have done, why don't you come in for tea, it will be very nice, and so on. And so the Canadian said, okay, I'll come in for tea. And then he came in for tea. And then after he left, the brother was saying, why did he come in for tea? He should have understood I didn't literally mean come in for tea. Now this is the problem. Now there's one book that I forgot the author of. She said that English-speaking people communicate to relay information, while Arabs, and this is the important part, is Arabs communicate to relay an emotional experience. Now this sentence explains everything, because it explains, if I'm going to relay not information, I want to tell you how I feel about it, then I can't tell you how I feel about it unless I exaggerate, I dramatize, I say all these kind of things. Then if I don't, then my feelings is not really that much. If I say thank you, if I say thank you so much, you really shouldn't have done this, come in for tea and stuff like that, then I really mean it, then I'm really happy. But if I say thank you, I'm not really happy. Okay, and this is how it's going to be understood. So I have to really dramatize and say how I feel about it, and this is the emotional experience. And so when he said come in for tea, he didn't literally mean come in for tea. He meant that you are so much welcome that sometimes in the future, you're really welcome to come in for tea at some point, But so we don't take it literally. Why? Because it can be used, dramatization and all this over exaggerations, to relay how I feel, not necessarily meaning every word. So you can understand where misunderstandings can happen here. Now, as I said, the importance of the language, the Arabs really take pride in the Arabic language. It is said in English, and I don't remember also where I read that, is that not every English-speaking person is an Englishman, but yes, every Arab-speaking person is an Arab. And so the Arabic language determines the identity. And so they're very proud of it. They're very proud of the poetry. It is said that the Bedouin has two weapons. One is his sword, and the other is having a poet in that tribe, because he can take up and put down tribes with just his poetry. And so they have, for example, in the Gulf, they have $1 million poet competitions, and then they recite poetry, and then, you know, it's very, even in the newspapers, every day they publish poetry in the Gulf area. And so also the language of the faith itself, the language of the Quran is Arabic, so everybody is supposed to learn some kind of Arabic if he's becoming a Muslim, just to do the prayers. Now, one thing I wanted to really to point out is this can happen in all languages and not just in the Arabic language, is the literal translations. Even if you say, okay, Jude is speaking good English, but sometimes if I'm speaking too much now, even presenting this presentation, sometimes the brain brings forward literal translations of words, and sometimes they can be out of context. For example, there's a story, one of the principals, I give these presentations at international schools, and this one principal was complaining about a parent, and she's telling me, well, she was a very strong-willed lady, and so she was upset from a parent. He said, I'm nervous. And I said, were you upset? And she said, yeah, I was mad from something. And then he said, why are you nervous? And then I smiled and I said, this is what he said. He said, why are you upset? Why are you upset? Why are you mad? He said, he said, why I'm nervous. I said, his mind literally translated a word in Arabic that is asabi, has something to do with the nervous system. So it can be literally translated into nervous, but he didn't really mean the English understanding of the nervous. And so it can happen in any language. So before we go into judgment and misjudge people, please ascertain that this is actually what they mean by putting it in another way before we judge each other. This is some of the words that you might hear, inshallah. Inshallah is an abused term. The way I see it is it's an abused term. What it really means is God willing. God willing, I will come. Can you come? Are you coming for tea? Yes, God willing, I will come for tea. If it is used by a practicing Muslim, it's actually invoking or asking God's helping him to come for tea. Because it is in the Quran that don't say that you will do anything without saying inshallah, God willing. Why? Because it puts the human in the proper perspective in relationship to God. It humbles us that yes, we have the intention, we do it, but it actually happening, materializing, it depends on God's will, and we cannot change that. And so this is what it's supposed to be. And so a practicing Muslim would say it with the intention that he's coming, and he's just saying that because God asked him to, and he's depending on God. But because of the indirect style of communication and the high context style of communication, and to preserve relationships, people use and abuse this word. For example, somebody told me the story that he invited somebody for pizza, invited an Arab for pizza. And so the Arab said over the phone, he said, yes, I'm coming. And then he said something about his wife. He has to do this. And then he said something about his son, he has to do this. And then at the end they said, inshallah, I'll come. And so this is a problem. He didn't show up, and he's not coming. And so what he said is his style of communication is, I want to say no, but we go back now to what we have learned. He's not going to say no directly because he has to save your face. You've been so nice to invite him for pizza, so he can't say no. But he has to tell you in a way that he can't come. So he's dancing the dance. So he's telling you, my wife has to do this, of course, which means that I have to help her with this, and my son has to do this, which means I have to help him with this. And then at the end I'm saying inshallah, and they use inshallah as a way to indirectly say no. It should not be used that way, but it is being abused in this culture because of the indirectness style of communication. And so when I came first to this country, I was dealing with expats who are non-Arab, non-Muslims. So I was saying, inshallah, I'll come. And she says, no, please don't give me the inshallah. Are you coming or are you not coming? And so you have to ascertain the person, understand the person that you are dealing with, if it is coming out from the Islamic perspective or the Islamic context, or it is more with Arab traditions, trying not to be direct and saving your face. Now the other one is mashallah, and there are more words. I'm just sticking to these two. Mashallah is something that the people say when there's something good that happens. My son, the teacher tells me he has 100% in his math test, and I say mashallah, and that is enough. In doing that, I am actually invoking God's protection on my son. I understand that everything good comes from God, and so I'm accepting that blessing, that gift, and I'm invoking God's protection on it. And sometimes people get nervous if non-Muslims don't say mashallah. Now this is another word that you will hear often, and it is more of an abused word used by the children. Now what does haram mean? You will hear it all the time. Haram, haram, haram. Now haram, what it really means is religiously forbidden. And there are only a few things that are religiously forbidden. But because of the communication style and the type of exaggeration, dramatization, and all of that, so if somebody wants to say don't do that, it is not good to do that, he comes out with the big guns and say this is religiously forbidden, haram. So when they say haram, they put a lot of emphasis, and so it's exaggerated. And so it is always used, and it doesn't really mean anything related to religiously forbidden. It's just a form of exaggeration. So this is why I say it's an abused expression to exaggerate the effect. Now sometimes haram is used in a different context, that the teacher is giving you a test, for example, tomorrow, and then the kids don't want that, and so they say haram, teacher, it's kind of have pity on us kind of use. And so this is one term that can be abused. Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, it's actually praise be to God. Now this term can be used to say that everything comes from God. Every blessing that I have comes from God. And so when you tell me something good, I say Alhamdulillah. So if you tell me my child is the best in the class, and so if I say Alhamdulillah, this is sufficient. And it doesn't mean that I don't care about my child, or I don't encourage him, or I'm not really happy about his advancement. Because to me, it's a blessing that comes from God. And so I express my satisfaction by saying Alhamdulillah. That means everything goes back to God. And this is plenty when I say Alhamdulillah. Now, something also to do with communication is the significance of the right. You must have heard about this also, because it is a little bit well known, is that Arabs, specifically Muslims in general, they eat with the right hand, they write with the right hand, because the left you're supposed to clean yourself with, and so the right hand is used to do these things. And if I want to shake hand, I start from the right. If I want to serve something, I start from the people on my right. If people are entering the door, the ones on my right should enter first, and so on. And so even still in the Gulf area, if you are dealing in the Gulf area with people who are Qataris, do not, for example, take things from them with your left, or give them something with your left. Do that with your right hand, otherwise they get insulted. This is a practice of the Prophet, that he used to use the right for these kind of things, and so people just wanted to do that like the Prophet. Now, the other important thing in this area of the world is interaction between the sexes. How do we communicate with the other sex? Now, in order to do that, I want to draw an analogy. When I was living in Canada and I had my children, when I had my last one, they brought me a little booklet in the hospital, and they said, okay, here in the book, here you put his footprint, here you write some markings if he has, and then here you pull some of his hair and you stick it there. This is a booklet so that in case your child gets abducted or you lose him, and then so to prevent not being able to recognize him again, then you have this booklet. It's a preventative measure. And then my child got into nursery school, and in nursery school there was these skits about a stranger. What does a stranger look like? And what do you do when a stranger comes about? If a lady comes to you at the park and she tells you, please come and help me look for my dog, what do? You jump up and down and you start screaming, stranger, stranger. And they do these skits to help the children know how to behave. This is a preventative measure to prevent abduction. Okay, and it's acceptable and practiced and even taught in that culture. Nobody objects to that. And then by the time, I don't remember, 6 or 7, he's taught about his private parts. What are your private parts? Who can touch and who cannot touch your private parts? This is also a preventative measure in that culture to prevent sexual abuse. Now, all these have been taught to my child before he's 6 and 7 in that culture as preventative measures. Okay, now I want you to carry this analogy and come to this part of the world and look at the measures that I'm going to say now as preventative measures. The same thing about the abduction and the sexual abuse measures. If it doesn't mean that my child is going to be abducted or sexually abused, but people do these measures as a preventative measure. And in this culture, what I'm going to discuss now doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen, but people use these measures in interacting with the opposite sex as preventative measures. Now, to prevent what? Now, all the people, when they behave based on Islam, they take the rulings from the Holy Book, from the Islamic law, from the Quran. Now, the scholars have found that all the rulings that there are in the Quran are there to preserve and to maintain 5 things for every individual and for the society: preservation of faith, life, intellect, genealogy, and chastity, and wealth. And all the rules that are there to maintain these 5. For example, no stealing. Why? For the preservation of wealth. No usury. Give away from your money. All of these to maintain this preservation of wealth. Now, what I'm going to say, these rules of interaction with the opposite sex are there for the preservation of genealogy and chastity for everyone in the community and for the community at large. Now, one of the first things to talk about when we talk about interaction between the sexes is the dress code. The dress code is the first thing that everybody sees, and this is a preventative measure for the preservation of genealogy and chastity. Now, the dress code had to be covering certain parts of the body, both for women and men. It has to be not see-through, and it has to be loose. And so so that people do not talk to the body, they're talking to the person in that body. And I would like to add here a few things as well, is even children are taught to dress in a more modest way since they are very young, at a very young age. Especially when the 2 sexes are present. One thing that always comes up in the school settings is that, now I'm going to get ahead of myself here by talking about the school setting, just in case I forget, the dress code, you sometimes find the boys taking out the shirt and not tucking it under the pants. This is a form of modesty. It is not a form of laziness, as it can be seen in other cultures. If you remember that the boys or the men in the Gulf are dressed in thobes, in long dresses that does not shape their body, they're more comfortable putting the shirt outside, covering the back. And so this is a sign of modesty, and it's not a sign of laziness. And the same thing when children are taught to swim. In some schools there are swimming classes. Now when the kids are finished, there's nothing in Islam that even the same sex can see each other without clothes. Okay, there has to be certain limits, certain things that they have to cover. And so kids are not encouraged to see each other without clothes. So when they come out from the swimming pool and they have to change their clothes, they get uncomfortable, especially the little ones, that they have to change in front of each other, in front of other boys, in front of other boys. And so the teachers usually don't understand that, why they're reluctant. Sometimes they have to do it, they will do it, but it's actually hurting them. They think that they did something wrong. And so the teachers have to know this. And so one of the schools that realized this, and because the parents were active and they talked to the administration, so what the administration did is that they did certain types of towels that are like tents. You know, you put it through, your head comes up at the top of the tent and it covers to their knees, and so they can change under it, because there aren't enough stalls. And everybody wears one, they undress and then they put their clothes on, and then nobody sees anybody else. And so this is also important to realize. And the general rule for the dress code is the more you're covered, the more you are respected. And because if you dress properly, you are helping people to preserve genealogy and chastity in the whole community. Doesn't mean anything bad is happening, but it is a preventative measures to help. And so this is a campaign that was put forward maybe a year ago by one of the Qatari ladies, and there's another, I think it was another one by another lady in the United Arab Emirates. These are people, citizens who are getting frustrated with all the influx of people who are not helping them preserve the genealogy and chastity of their community. So these are the no dress code for men and women that people should not dress when they are in the Gulf, in these Muslim countries. And she is saying, remember this, you are one of us. The campaign is called One of Us. And so if you remember the circles that I talked to you about, and so one of these things about the circles is, okay, I am not from these circles, I am not a Muslim, I'm not an Arab, so I'm way out in the outer circles. If you want to come inside these circles, and you want the people to trust you, and you want to have a better relationship with them, then you have to show that you care. You have to show that you understand the culture, and that you reciprocate with them, and you give them you have some responsibility toward them. You give them loyalty. You behave like you are in the inner circles, and that you care. And so they become, there's more trusting than from them towards you, and of course then there's more loyalty to you, there's more responsibility, and so on. But of course there's also more things that you should be wary, since you are inside of the circles now. There's more responsibility and expect things that are expected from you. Now also, so this is what they're saying. So you've been living in our country, you came, you're sharing the health system, you're sharing educational system, you're eating from the food that we have and everything, and so you are one of us. So you have to help us in maintaining. So this is now your responsibility, because you're inside these circles now. So you have to help us to maintain and preserve genealogy and chastity in our culture. This was also a clipping from the newspaper about also referring to the law here that people should dress modestly, and referring to the campaign. And they actually put at the door of the malls little things saying that people should dress modestly. And there's one thing that was published in the Arabic newspaper. There was a Qatari guy with his family at the grocery store filling his cart and standing at the cashier, and then he found that in front of him there was a guy wearing shorts and tank tops, and he was so uncomfortable. He didn't know what to do, and he said, I just left with my family and left the cart the way it is, because I don't know what to tell my children, what to tell my wife, where should we put our gaze. And this was a problem. And so the dress code is a very important thing. Now, physical touching, I'm not talking about hugging and kissing, although some Arabs hug and kiss people of the opposite sex. But usually I'm talking about shaking hands. Now, there are two rulings here. There's one rule that you can shake hands only in certain circumstances. The other one is it's better not to shake hands. So you don't know who is applying which rule, or some people apply the two rules depending on the situation. And so it's better not to put out your hand unless the other person of the opposite sex puts out their hand, and then you can shake. These are preventative measures. It doesn't mean if we shake hands something bad is going to happen, or we're breaking the chastity and genealogy or whatever. But these are, as I said, preventative measures for the preservation of genealogy and chastity for everybody. Now, body language in Islam is very serious kind of body language. There's no flirtation, there's no gazing at the opposite sex, and this can be a problem because some people misinterpret this kind of behavior. If you are talking with a guy and you're a female and he is not looking at you while you're talking with him, in the Western societies this can be interpreted as disrespect. Although native Indians, they do that in all their interactions. They don't look at you in the face as a sign of respect. And this is the same here, but from a different context, is that if you're dealing with the opposite sex, they may not look at you in the face. They might listen to what you're saying. They're seriously listening to you, and they're not being distracted by looking at your body. And so gazing, lowering the gaze, as this guy who was standing at the store at the cashier said, I didn't know where we're going to put our gaze, because this is what you're supposed to do. So all of these fit into complement each other as a one package for the preservation of genealogy and chastity. It doesn't mean anything bad, but it's just a preventative measure. Now, the front and back, and the media always has their time with this front and back kind of thing, is the men at the mosque, they're at the front and they throw the women at the back, so they're superior and the women are oppressed and inferior in that culture. This is wrong, because you're not looking at it in the context that it was created. If you go to a classroom, is the teacher putting superior kids at the front and inferior kids at the back? She has her own criteria for seating the students based on certain goals that she's trying to achieve, and this is the same thing. You can't have prayers and we're focusing on God, and then people are bending over and putting their head on the floor and all of these movements and putting the women at the front. Seriously, it has to serve the goal. It has nothing to do with being inferior or superior. Even if you go into a lecture hall, you will find sometimes the women sitting at one side. A woman goes in, she sits on the right or left. Then another man comes in, he will sit in the other side of the room. There's nothing on the board saying you sit here, you sit there. You just find people separating because they're more comfortable that way, and it helps them to maintain the other measures. How am I going to lower the gaze if I have men all around me? Or women if they have women, men if they have women all around them. So all these measures have to complement each other. We cannot ask people to lower their gaze and then we put them beside each other and expect them also not to physically touch each other. And so everything has to complement the other as measurements for the preservation. Okay, and it doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen. The same thing doesn't mean my child is going to be abducted if I maintain these preventative measures. They are just preventative measures, but everybody accepts them and everybody follows them. Now the last one is male, female alone. Is that one male and one female should not be in a situation, in a place that is closed, nobody can see or hear them. And so it's better to have somebody else also with you, or have the door open, or have a window, or have something. And so I was giving this presentation to an international school, and 2 weeks later one of the teachers comes to me and says, it really helped me because I was in a situation where I was teaching high school boys, and the bell rang, and then one of the students was asking me something, and the other students were leaving the room, and he started getting uncomfortable, and I didn't understand why. And then after I heard this presentation, I went back and talked to him, and he said, and I said, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that was making you uncomfortable and so on. And then he smiled and was very relieved and said, thank you very much for coming and talking to me about this, and I knew that you didn't have an idea at that time. And so this is also something else that one should be wary of. All of these are preventative measures that are expected and practiced in this culture. Now if we look at the dimension of space and time, in Islam, life is a gift of time. Okay, we are born, we die. This time in between is a gift, and it only has value if it is used while being mindful of God. So if the students are coming to school while being mindful of God, that we are studying and seeking knowledge to please God, then they are worshiping God by going to school. Even if they're eating, even if they're drinking, even if they're sleeping or playing basketball, if they are doing it mindful of God, that we are taking care of our bodies to please God, then this is a form of worship for God. Okay, now the Friday noon prayer is very important. Now, as I said, people in the Gulf, or the Arabs in general, are polychronic in their use of time. But this is not the case when it's around Friday noon prayers. Noon prayers is mandatory for men to do it at the mosque in groups, and it is allowed for the ladies if they want to go, but it's not mandatory for the ladies. Now around that time, the noontime prayer for Friday, there are no meetings, they will not answer calls, then they become monochronic in their use of time. Of course, I do not advise to set up any meetings around that time. Now, it's not just the Friday prayers, because praying is 5 times a day. And as you will find, some people will pray, some people will not pray. It depends where they are in that field that I discussed before. And so praying 5 times a day, the sun changes with the changing seasons. And so the time every day changes a bit. And so it is better to check the time for prayers if you're trying to set up meetings, if you're trying to do a parent-teacher meeting at the end of the day, and so on. Because you will have people leaving your meetings or coming late to your meetings because they don't want to miss the time for prayers. And they're not going to tell you that. they'll just show up late, or they will leave after half an hour and you wouldn't know why they left. Now, let's say if the noon prayer is 12 and then the afternoon prayer is 3, so what happens is that there is an allowed time to pray between 12 and 3 for the noon prayer, just before the afternoon prayer, the call for prayer occurs. And so there's a 3-hour period that is allowed time to pray noon. Now, what people do is that the more I am becoming a good or better practicing Muslim, the more I want to pray within this allowed period, but I also want to pray in the preferred time to pray, which is usually half an hour after the call for prayer. So I want to pray around 12:30. And so if I even want to be better, then I want to pray at the mosque, not even at home or at school, and so on. And so this is how it goes. You will find people behaving differently according to where they are in that field. Now, if you set up a time, or if you want to meet somebody even, make sure that it's not around prayer time, or if it has to be, that there's a place where they can leave to pray and then come back. Now, some schools have a prayer room where the kids can pray. If the call to prayer comes during recess time, then you will find people praying during recess time. They cannot pray the noon prayer before it comes. And this is sometimes is a mix-up for the teachers. They want to pray the prayer for noon, but they cannot pray it before 12 if the call for prayer is at 12. They cannot do it beforehand. So if the recess comes after 12, they will pray the noon prayer. If it doesn't, then they can't pray it. And the problem is, yes, they have an allowed period to pray, but if the time they reach home is past 3, then they will miss that noon prayer. And to a practicing Muslim, that is not acceptable. So if they can't pray it in recess, then they would want to pray it after the school finishes, but before they leave, so that they don't miss that prayer. And the other thing is fasting. Although now Ramadan is coming in during the summer, so there's no school. However, you will find people that are fasting, and breaking of the fast is a monochronic time. That's the only thing they will be doing, is breaking the fast. And you will find people praying for fasting for 2 reasons. There is voluntary fasting, usually Mondays and Thursdays, or the 3 days in the middle of the lunar month. You will find some kids fasting, some teachers fasting, and also, but they will not tell you necessarily. And also, you will find people fasting if they broke their fast during the month of Ramadan because of traveling or being sick or other reasons, and so they will make up that fasting during the year. And so these are some of the times how the concept of polychronic may move to monochronic because of these things that happen. Now, when I was teaching at one of the universities here, I was teaching Islamic culture, and I was teaching it to students from different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds. And so when I asked them, how many of you use a calendar? All the non-Arabs raised their hands. 2 of the Arabs raised their hands. One person said, I use it when I'm outside my country. And the other lady said, I use it to write birthdays. And so what happens is that they don't need to use it. So we can't look at them from a perspective of people who use a calendar and say, how can they not use a calendar? Usually they don't need to use it in their country. When they leave the country, they're outside their system of communication, then they need to use it. So what happens is, in collectivist culture in general, people are already they know already what everybody else is doing. They're already into the grapevine. So I know this person, this is what's happening. I know what that person, there's always communication, and there's always invitations, and there are always reminders of what's happening, so they don't really need a calendar. That's why that person said, when I'm outside my country, I use a calendar, because he's outside that grapevine and people are not using the same way of communication. And so he needs a calendar. Now, I asked one of these kids one of my students, and I said, so if I want to invite you to a wedding, how much lead time do I have to give you? And he said, for men, 2-3 days. For women, 2 weeks. And I said, what if I tell you a month in advance? He smiled and he said, it'll slip off my mind. And so this is not how it works in this culture. It is a way of, it is more related to social interactions. And so there was a story also, one of the international schools that I give these presentations to, they wanted to have meetings with the parents of their children. And so the first meeting, the principal said to the parents, so put it in your calendar, every third Wednesday of the month we're meeting. And so she had very few people showing up. And of course the conclusion was, these Arab people, they don't care about the education of their children. Now, of course, this is not true. Now, what happened maybe a year later or something, the SMS system was introduced because every other organization was introducing this service. And so they were SMSing people 2 to 3 days before the meeting. And so they had more people showing up. And of course, why? Because now they're using the system that works for that country. So it is very important to realize this fact. Now, another thing is sharing my personal space that we just discussed. Now, it's sharing what I consider mine can be different from culture to culture. In collectivist culture, my personal space is very small. And so I'm more prone to sharing a lot of things. And so, for example, what I found out while teaching is that sometimes cheating is considered a form of sharing. I had people coming to me, exact copies, assignment with exact copies, and when I asked, and I took marks off, the student was very upset, and she said, "But I am the one who gave her the answers." And I said, "Yes, so that is cheating. You're helping her to cheat." And she said, "No, but I am the one who gave the answers." So basically, what she's saying is, I am the one who's being generous. I am sharing. So sometimes these kids in these cultures, they don't see this as cheating. They see this as, I am lending her my sweater. I'm giving away my, some of my stuff, and this is kind of sharing. This is generosity. So I'm the one who gave. Why are you taking marks off from me? And so also one has to be careful with that cheating and sharing. Now we come to the last dimension here, which is power distance. Now there's one thing that was told by a sociologist, an Arab sociologist. His name is Al-Wardi. He was studying the Iraqi Bedouins, and he said, of course, the Arabs are courageous, they're generous, and so on. But if I have to add one more thing that really is important to know about the Arabs, is that they don't like to have the lower hand. They would like to have the upper hand in every kind of dealing and interaction. Now, when we are dealing with the school system, if you are the principal, the teachers, if you have Arab teachers, then they are the lower hand. If you are a teacher, you are an international teacher, and you have Arab kids, then they are also on the lower hand, on the receiving end. And so how you deal with that is very important, because sometimes, yes, you cannot have the upper hand in that kind of a situation, and so you have to be very considerate towards the children that they are, or the parents that they are. For example, on the receiving hand, you're the one who has the power. And so, for example, I can tell stories from when I was growing up in the Middle East, and then if we had somebody to come and, for example, fix the house, if I want to pay that person money, of course, then my husband, for example, will pay him. He will put the money in the palm of his hand and then shake the hand of the worker. And so the worker will take the money when he shakes the hand, and he will not stand there and count the money, because that is not saving your face. Okay, so I am saving, or my husband is saving the worker's face He is in the lower hand. He has the lower hand because he's the one who has to receive the money. But I'm of course not showing him that he is on the lower end by not giving it directly to his face. I am shaking his hand, saying thank you very much, and he takes the money. And he's not going to count the money because that's not saving my face. Then he's showing disrespect, or he doesn't trust me with that. And there are a number of examples, the same as people have to be very considerate when they have the upper hand and they're dealing with Arabs, and the Arabs have the lower hand. Respect is very, very important. Arab tribes respect their leader, they respect their sheikh. But if the sheikh does not respect them, share the loot with them, and then they start dividing into sub-tribes. And so it's very important for the teacher to show respect, to respect the students. Now you have to remember that the Gulf Arabs are not, they're also different than other expat Arabs. The Gulf Arabs, the kids, these kids are raised in households that they are the ones who tell adults what to do. They have their drivers, they have their maids, they have these people around, and they are the ones who boss these people around, although they're like 10 years old or even younger. And so they are used to being dealing with adults, and they give orders. So now they're in school and you have to give them orders. You're not even a Qatari and you're not even an Arab, and so there has to be a bond of trust built between the teacher and the kids. And I will discuss this bond of trust because also there was a study done about business people doing, actually Germans, doing business with Gulf Arabs. So they did this study to see trust building relationships in doing business, and they found, of course, everybody wants that. But what they found different is that the Gulf Arabs wanted the Germans to spend more time building the relationship. Arabs don't do business with companies, they do business with people. And you have to view it the same way here in the school system. You are not from the circles that are close to me. You are from, if you're not an Arab, you're not a Muslim, you're from the outside circles. You can be inside, become in the inside circles if you show respect, if you show you care, if you show that I really care about what happens to you, and you practice your social skills, your social intelligence, and then you become in the inside circles. Then the kids trust you more, and when they trust you, they will listen to you. And so respect is very important. The children cannot be treated like the children in other Western countries, or even sometimes other Arab countries, that they yell at them and they expect them, because sometimes they will rebel if you do that. Now they also value strength. Strength is really valued, the Arabs. So a mother sometimes she will be proud that her son hits the other kid, but not the other way around. He knows how to take his right. Nobody can take his right from him. And so that is a sign that the mother will be proud that her son is strong. So there's nothing to complain about. Why are you complaining to me about my son? And so strength is valued and respected. Now we finished the second part of the presentation. We talked about the dimensions through the Arab Islamic filters, and now we're going to talk about the third part, which is how does it come out in the school settings, in the different interactions between teachers, parents, and children. First, I want to talk about disciplining and fighting. Now, I have stated the status of mothers in Islam and in the Arabic cultures. Mothers have a very high status in Islam. And sometimes what you find is the more conservative cultures, you will find that the kids will not even say their mother's names. She will be the mother of Muhammad, the mother of Ali, but you will not really know her name, or her, if it's a boy, or his sister's names. Because if you know his mother's name, or the children know his mother's name or his sister's name, then if they swear, if they want to really hurt the person, then they will start swearing in terms of affecting the honor of that student. And this is something that the child cannot be quiet about. And this is very important to realize. Usually when kids fight in the Arab world, they start swearing using language like saying animal names, donkey, dog. They're swearing at each other. Okay, now this is a lower level of fighting. If, however, it escalates and somebody swears or uses or talks about the honor of the other person by talking about his mother or his sisters, now that boy who has been quiet for all year, he's been quiet and he's such a good boy and there's nobody complains about him, suddenly he's into the office because he actually punched somebody in the face and made his nose bleed. And then you're shocked why this happened. This happened because you have to understand why the situation happens. If the other boy had actually made comments about his honor, then that boy cannot be quiet. If he is quiet, he'll be made fun of by the other boys. They will pick on him that he didn't defend his honor. And this is what is said when that Zaidan football player, he in his last match in front of millions of people, he hit the other guy with his head because they said that guy said something about his honor. And so it's very important to understand this subject in the Arab world. It is very important. So it cannot be that child cannot be disciplined the same way as any other children. You have to realize what the situation is. He has to do it. And so you have to deal with the situation from the source, not just his reaction. And so the other thing is the importance of status in disciplining methods. Please do not import disciplining methods from West and apply them in Arab world. You have to be careful on the method of disciplining you're using. How is it culturally viewed? What is the purpose of disciplining? Are we trying to degrade the student that is in front of us? Are we trying to remove his self-confidence, make the other kids pick on him for the rest of his life, shame him? There's a shame. The Arabs and the collectivist cultures, they are the shame cultures, not the guilt cultures. You shame the students in front of other kids, you destroy his self-confidence, you destroy his self-image, you spill the water of his face. So you really have to evaluate your disciplining methods. For example, in one school, two kids were shoving each other, shoving and pushing. The teacher couldn't tell who started it, and so she said, okay, both of you have to pick up the garbage in recess. Now this is a very shameful thing to do in this culture. First of all, in collectivist culture, manual labor is looked down upon. Now the worst level in manual labor is picking up the garbage. Now this is not a class that you tell, okay kids, now we're going, all the kids in the school, they have to learn how to help out, and so everybody's going to pick up the garbage because we're helping how to clean the environment that we are in. This is different. It is different when you put it in that context, but when you pick up the garbage as a punishment, and that is the only child who's going to do it while everybody else is playing, you are really degrading that student. You cannot say, well, I want them also to understand that they should be cleaning up. Nobody wants kids to understand how to clean up and they make it as a punishment. You cannot do that. So you have to really evaluate the disciplining methods according to the culture. Otherwise, you will be hurting the student more than you think you are. Now, the other thing is loyalty. Collectivist cultures, people have these circles around them. So you'll find the Egyptians playing together, the Lebanese are playing together. Every culture has its circle. And so sometimes what you find when fights start is that, all the Egyptians will be involved against, for example, whoever hurt one of the Egyptian guys, or Lebanese or any other nationality. So what happened here is, I belong to this group. They protect my back, I protect theirs. And so if one Egyptian says, okay, that boy hit me, the whole group will have to come in and help defend. Because, and if I am one of that group and I don't defend, then when somebody hits me, nobody will stand by me. And so it's a matter of identity. It's a matter of the group that I belong to. And this is in collectivist cultures. Now, conflict management. Now, we talked about this. We talked about saving face. We talked about indirectness in conflict management. So the administration, let's say two kids fought. It's not advisable to put the parents in it if you can fix it. Because, as I said, parents don't want to break social relationships. It is better if the parents have to be involved, then the administration has to play the intermediary part. Okay? It's a win-win situation. You have to talk with these people and understand their suffering, understand where the problem is, and then you have to talk to these people and try to mediate between them. So that it's kind of as much as you can that you absorb the conflict and you don't put the two parents face to face to do that. Of course, there's exaggeration when people. You have to understand that. Okay, if you are a principal from the West and you're coming and talking to me about my child who's hitting somebody. Now, the way I am going to behave, I am going to exaggerate. I have to exaggerate because if I don't, it means I don't care much about my child. So I have to exaggerate and say, but no, that person did this person, and my feelings will be out there and everything, because this is how Arabs communicate. And in the same thing, if my child was the one who's hurting, I will exaggerate. But you have to understand, this is very important because I have seen Westerners, administrations, people, that they don't seem to understand this. When Arabs talk, when they're upset, they exaggerate the feeling. Okay? They do not literally mean what they said. I'm going to call the police. I am going to doesn't really mean literally he's going to call the police. He's just showing you how much upset he is. Don't take it literally. Now, the sharing and cheating, I have discussed that. Let's go now to teacher-student relationships. I mentioned that there has to be, the students will accept the leadership of the teacher if it is fair. You have to be fair. It's not enough I am the teacher and I'm telling you what to do. If you want the students to listen to you, to respect you, to trust you, you have to be fair. Now, this has been also said answering questions in class. It has been said, Hofstede said this, that in collectivist cultures, usually if the teachers want the students to answer questions, there's a problem that the students will not raise their hands and answer. Why? Because they belong to the group, the class. They don't want to show off. They don't want to be labeled in the class. They want to still belong to that group. And so if they're not being given the okay or go ahead from the rest of the group to say it, then they will not raise their hands. And so one suggestion was that the kids are split into groups and they discuss the matter with them. You give them a sort of a subject and they talk about it between them, and then they delegate a speaker between them, and then then that's how they can get this. Also, if somebody stands up and says something, you cannot put that person down. You cannot spill the water of his face, because it is a shame culture, and so you have to be careful with that. So you have to also, the teacher has to show some respect by explaining. If you give orders, they're not soldiers. You have to explain a little bit why you are doing this. You have to show that you care. You have to, as I mentioned that in that slide, you have to practice your social skills to build that bond of trust. And sometimes it's hard if the class loses this teacher, she quits, she goes somewhere else. They have to build that that bond again with the new teacher. It's better not to change teachers, But of course, if it happens, then it happens. But everybody has to know this, that if you fall in the outside circles, you have to work on your social skills to win their trust. And I mentioned about tucking your shirt and the swimming classes. And sometimes you'll find parents who want their kids to write with the right hand. Okay, we talked about the significance of the right. So you will find them wanting the children, although the children, write with their left hands, but they want them still to write with the right hand. They want them to eat with the right. And so you'll find also children that they will not use the left hand for eating. So you have to understand why he's not using both hands. Why he's insisting on writing with the right also, although he is more comfortable with the left, and so on. Interruptions. In collectivist cultures, the relationships are more important, and so you will find that children, especially if this is an Arabic class or an Islamic studies class where the teacher is an Arab and she's teaching the children, you will find that the atmosphere is very different than if it was an international teacher teaching the Arabs. In the Arabic class, you will find the kids, they're like at home. Sometimes they're up from their seats, moving around. The teacher is explaining. Sometimes she's raising her voice. The children are still talking. A lot of interruptions. They don't wait for you to finish before they start talking. They start doing these. This is the collectivist cultures. Although in Islamic point of view, interruptions are not an Islamic practices. The Prophet used to, if somebody's talking to him, he used to turn all of his body, face him, listen very carefully, and when the person is done, the Prophet would usually say, "Are you done?" And then he would start answering. And so that is the Islamic way of doing things. You can try to use that and explain to them that this is how you heard that this is how the Prophet used to do, and so on, and help them not to interrupt. Now, parent-teacher interactions. Now you have to remember, if there's a meeting, relationships takes precedence. They may not show up for the meeting if they have something else or something that came up with the family and so on. It's not because they don't care about their child education. And also, you have to realize that if there's a quiz or if there's an exam or a test that they have to take, and the children, one of the students, his cousin is getting married, and it's usually long nights, 3 days in a row or something. They stay up late, and they're not going to study for the test. And you cannot really convince them to study for the test and not to be involved in the cousin's wedding. That group is part of their identity. They will live with them for the rest of their life. And so this test is what? It's a test. It will go. I'll do another test. It's not as important. And so relationship always takes precedence. Take into consideration prayer times. I mentioned this before. Understand why some children want to pray before they go home, or they want to pray during recess. It's important for them, and they have to do sometimes ablution in the washrooms, cleanse themselves before they do the prayers. Now, a leading time, SMS time, I explained that, how in this culture it's knowing what goes through the grapevine. Shaking hands, it's better not to shake hands of the parents of the opposite sex unless they put out their hands first. And remember the dress code and the eye contact and the lowering of the gaze. Also about the khulwa part, or being alone with the children, and I did explain about that in the previous slide. Literal translations, I mentioned that in my presentation, that even the children or the parents, if you think that they're coming on too strong, or you misunderstand them, ascertain from repeating the question in a different way that you really got what they're trying to tell you. Okay, I want to end these last two slides by looking at the subject of teaching and learning from a little bit different perspective. If we look at that the students and the parents come from one culture, while teacher curriculum come from another culture. If we're talking about, for example, international schools in the Gulf Arab world. Now also I want to view it from the teaching philosophy or the teaching style and the purpose of education. How we can understand the clashes that can happen between teachers and parents, school and parents and students, better if we understand the differences that exist in the purpose of education and the teaching philosophy. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is the purpose of education. Now there are two perspectives here. There's an Arabic perspective and then there's also an Islamic perspective. The purpose of education from an Islamic perspective, and this is, you will find the more a person is practicing and he has the worldview, the Islamic worldview, then he will be looking at it from this way. The purpose of education to a Muslim is to seek knowledge. Seeking knowledge is a kind of worship. The first verse that came to the Prophet, the first verse from the Quran was read. In the name of thy Lord, read. He's the one who taught you by the pen and so on. And so that was the first verse. Seeking knowledge is central to any Muslim. Any aspect of life, you have to interact with any aspect of life, with any human, with any things that you have to achieve. You have to have knowledge. First, the Islamic worldview, how to interact with these things around me, with the universe around me. And then there's also how to live, kind of knowledge. And so a Muslim is encouraged to seek knowledge from the moment he is born till the moment he dies. It's a continuous learning process, because the purpose of life in Islam is to know God, to enter into a relationship based on knowledge that leads to loving God, that leads to surrendering to God. And you can't know God if you don't know what He created. The world, the systems, the universe, how we interact, knowing ourselves. All of this falls into the Islamic worldview of knowing or coming to know God. So this is the purpose of education, is to seek knowledge. It is a kind of worship. If you are mindful of God while you're seeking knowledge. And this can be used to encourage students who are more practicing Muslim, to remind them that this is the purpose of education. The purpose of education as a Muslim, you are worshipping God. You are seeking knowledge as the Prophet had told us to do. Now this is one perspective. Now the other perspective, and this is the Arab perspective, and I can't say all Arabs are like that, but this is a general view that some Arabs view knowledge or education through this perspective, is education helps me to lift my status, to further polish my identity. Now, you will see that now in the Gulf area, people are becoming more in their seeking of knowledge, are becoming more like also the Arab expats in their seeking that my son or my daughter has to become either an engineer or a physician. Some people view the whole education system is a way for my son or my daughter to be an engineer or a physician. They don't even see the other kind of professions. And so from that perspective, the purpose of education is to lift my status. And so the best thing that lifts my status in this culture is either to be a doctor or an engineer. So my child is going to school to get the high marks that will enable him to be a doctor and an engineer. So the marks are more important than acquiring the knowledge. And when he finishes, if he doesn't get to be a doctor and an engineer in his country, sometimes they're sent to other countries, even if the universities there is not well known, is not accredited, it doesn't matter, or by correspondence, or if I can, or anything, to get that degree and put it on the wall that I'm a doctor or I'm an engineer. So that's a different way or a different perspective of education. Now, when we understand that that perspective exists, then it will help us explain why, when the teacher gives homework or projects, parents do it, not the student does it. Or parents get other people, pay them money to do it, to do the projects, to do the homework. Why? Because, as we said, it's important that the mark is more important than acquiring the knowledge from that perspective. So it is important to know that this exists, and to be able to work around that. Probably if you use the Islamic perspective for those who are practicing, to understand that this is why we are seeking knowledge. It's not just the mark. Now I want to talk about a little bit about the teaching philosophy, or the style of teaching. Now the teaching philosophy, if you are dealing, it depends on the age of the parents that you are dealing with a lot of times. What kind of learning system did they grow up in? For example, if you're talking with older parents like myself, we grew up in a rote learning system, and so you memorize, and then you take the books. They send the books home. I study from the books at home. My parents help me studying, and I memorize, and then I prepare for exams, and then I write the exams. I get the mark. And this is a system that a lot of us grew up with. If you are dealing with parents who are younger, or they went through the British system themselves, then they have a different perspective on this style of teaching. For example, there's more information in the lot learning system. We grew up with a lot of information that you have to know. In the, let's say, the British system, there's less information. There's more focus on how you learn and how you acquire knowledge. So a parent from the rote learning system might think your school is a bad school. It's not a good school because the children are not learning much. There's not a lot of knowledge. They're not memorizing as much. So this is one point. The other point is the teacher. There's a lot of dependence on the teacher in collectivist cultures in general, and in the Arab culture, because the teacher has the upper hand. So in power distance relationship, she is supposed to share that information in a way that assures that my kids are going to get high marks. Okay, I'm not talking about knowledge, I'm talking about high marks. And so if she is not delivering that, then that teacher is not good. If my child is not getting high marks, it is not his fault. It's the fault of the teacher. This is usually in collectivist culture. And so the teacher is being blamed. That is not a good teacher. I remember when we were growing up, the teacher would stand before the exam. She would stand at the board, and she would actually write down or dictate to us what the summary of the lesson that we have finished, that we were going to memorize and be tested on next day or something. And so she is telling us. I found when I was teaching also at universities here, you find that the students, even university students, are not well equipped to take notes. They don't know how to take notes by themselves. They expect the teacher to dictate. Okay, now you can write, and then the teacher dictates what he wants that the students to learn, and so that they can memorize. So how am I going to know what's important if you don't tell me as a teacher what is important? So that is also a point that can clash, or misunderstanding can happen. They need to understand how to take important notes and how to be independent. So you have to understand that the parents and the kids, if they're coming from the regular Arabic schools, this is what they are used to. Everything is basically is thrown on the teacher. Now, the involvement of parents are usually very much involved, especially Arab expats, very much involved in the education of the children. They sit with them every day. What is the homework? What homework did you get? and they want the books because they want to help their children and see if the children took or understood what was explained to them today. And they can't do that if there are no books. How am I going to help my child learn if you don't send the books home? Now there's advantages and disadvantages in both systems. In the English system, for example, they don't send the books home, especially in primary schools. They don't send the books home. They depend that the kids got it from class, and then in the exam time, if the teacher will figure out that the kid is not understanding. Sometimes that is too late for that to happen, and the child has already developed a complex from not understanding and developed a block whenever math comes or whenever any subject that he didn't understand comes up. While in the rote learning system, that when the book goes home, the parent helps the teacher by seeing if my child understood what the teacher was explaining. So there's another line of defense, or another line of involvement there. So if my child falls through the crack in the first line, he gets caught at home that, okay, my child didn't get this point. He didn't understand this math lesson. Okay, and so there is advantages to that system. So some schools try to adopt or adjust to both, and sometimes they send books home and so on. So this is something to do with the differences between the two cultures. And it's very important that parents they also have to have some confidence. If they did not grow up in the American or the British system of teaching, they have to have confidence in that system, accepting that yes, my child is getting a good education, although he's not memorizing, although he's not bringing the books home, although the time for exams is not set and my child is not preparing for exams at home. And so it is important, like for example at the beginning of the year when new parents are welcomed and so on, that the administration explains to the parents that how the British system, how we give homework, how the children are being evaluated, why we don't send books, why exams are given this way, and so on. But it has to be explained from the parents' framework, from their rote learning kind of system. So you have to say in the way you grew up, what's important was this point, this point, this point. And we do achieve these points, for example, through following the British system, but we achieve them in a different way, and then you explain how you achieve them, so that to give confidence to the parents that yes, my child is getting a good education. And so it is important to reflect on these points. It will help understand why some parents might be disappointed, or sometimes they actually pull their kids out of the schools. That is all I wanted to say for this. These are some of the references that I found very useful. In general, talking about cultures in general and not about education. Hofstede book has actually some explanations about education as well. That's the third reference. And I have some recordings also on YouTube, shorter kind of recordings that elaborate on some of the points that were mentioned in this presentation. And thank you.